The silence of the 47th floor of the Ethelred Tower was a unique entity. It was not the absence of sound, but a sound in itself, a low, resonant hum that vibrated up from the building's core. The collective breath of a million sleeping circuits, and the whisper of conditioned air through meticulously hidden vents. To 13-year-old Leo, it was the sound of a sleeping giant, a beast of glass and steel that tolerated his presence only because it did not know he was there. He sat cross-legged on the polished marble floor, his back against a cool steel-gray pillar in the vast deserted atrium. His laptop, a refurbished model he had painstakingly upgraded himself, cast a lonely pool of white light around him, illuminating the complex web of Python code he was untangling. This was his homework, but not the kind his teachers assigned. This was the kind that truly mattered, the kind that made the world unfold in patterns of logic and possibility. Across the immense space, his mother Elena moved with a quiet, practiced grace. Her cart laden with cleaning supplies glided almost silently across the floor, its soft rubber wheels the only thing to defy the building's sterile hum. She was a shadow in this world of light, a vital but unseen component of the corporate machine. For 8 hours a night, 5 nights a week, she polished away the smudges and fingerprints of power, leaving the stage pristine for the titans of industry who would command it by day. Leo admired her efficiency. She never wasted a motion. Her work was a dance of methodical sweeps and precise sprays, a testament to a resilience he was only beginning to understand. He was her silent partner, her waiting audience of one. Since he was 10, he had spent his school holidays and occasional weeknights here in the silent, empty heart of corporate Chicago. It was better than being home alone, and the building's high-speed internet was a luxury their small apartment could not afford. He glanced up from his screen, his eyes tracing the clean, powerful lines of the architecture that soared into the darkness above. The offices that lined the atrium were glass boxes, their interiors dark and dormant. During the day, they were hives of activity filled with men and women in sharp suits who spoke a language of mergers and acquisitions he only partially understood. At night they were tombs filled with the ghosts of ambition. Leo cariño. Elena's voice was soft, a warm current in the chilled air. She approached him holding a small thermos and a paper bag. The scent of cinnamon and warm milk cut through the antiseptic smell of the cleaning fluids. "Take a break," she said, her smile gentle but tired. "Your brain will turn to code if you stare at that screen all night." He smiled back, a genuine, unguarded expression he saved only for her. "Just trying to finish this encryption module. It's for a personal project." She handed him the thermos and a warm churro from the bag. "A project that will make us millionaires, so your mother can finally retire to a beach in Mexico." She teased, her eyes twinkling. "Something like that?" Leo said, his tone light but with an undercurrent of serious intent. He bit into the sweet, crispy pastry. It was a taste of home, a comforting anchor in this alien environment. He watched her for a moment, her brow furrowed with a familiar mix of exhaustion and love. She deserved that beach. He was determined to give it to her one day. "Don't work too hard, Mama," he said. She ruffled his dark, curly hair. "The dirt never sleeps, Leo. I'll be on the executive floor. Mr. Thorne's office is always a disaster. Seems the more important the man, the more coffee he spills." She winked, and then, with another soft glide of her cart, she was gone, disappearing into the service elevator that would carry her to the building's upper echelons. Leo watched her go, the warmth of the churro fading in his stomach. He turned back to his laptop, but the spell of concentration had been broken. The silence seemed deeper now, more pronounced. He closed the coding window and stretched his joints, popping in the quiet. He needed to walk. He slipped his phone into his pocket and began to wander through the cavernous space. His sneakers made no sound on the floor. He was a ghost, just like his mother, moving through the hollowed-out shell of power. He passed the darkened reception desk, a monolith of black granite, and the towering digital waterfall that was now just a silent, dark wall. He felt an urge to explore a familiar pull he always had in this place. He took the grand, sweeping staircase, its glass steps seeming to float in the air up towards the executive suites his mother had mentioned. The 49th floor. The air here felt different, thinner, as if pressurized by the sheer weight of the decisions made within its walls. Most of the offices were dark, their occupants' secrets tucked away in locked drawers and password-protected files. But as he walked down the plushly carpeted hallway, he noticed a sliver of light from beneath one of the doors. The nameplate on the frosted glass read, "Marcus Thorne, Chief of Strategic Development." The coffee spiller. Leo slowed, his curiosity piqued. It was almost 2 in the morning. No one ever worked this late, not even the famously driven executives of Ethelred. He crept closer, his heart beginning to beat a little faster. The door was slightly ajar, just enough for him to peer through the narrow gap. The office was lavish with a sprawling mahogany desk and a floor-to-ceiling window that offered a breathtaking god's-eye view of the sleeping city. But Leo's attention was not on the view. It was on the bank of computer monitors on the desk. They were all on. One screen showed the stock market, a river of red and green numbers. Another showed a complex architectural model. But the central monitor held his gaze. It was a command prompt window, the kind he knew so well. Green text was scrolling rapidly against a black background, lines of code executing a complex script. It was a data transfer, a massive one, and it was heavily cloaked. Leo could see traces of masking protocols and rerouting scripts techniques used to hide a file's origin and destination. It was sloppy work for a professional, but highly suspicious for a corporate desktop. Then he saw the other window open behind the command prompt. It was a simple text editor containing a single chilling message. "The nightingale sings at dawn, silence the shepherd." The words seemed to hum with a malevolent energy. It wasn't corporate jargon. It was something else. A code. A threat. Nightingale. Shepherd. The names were allegorical, poetic, and utterly out of place in this environment of cold, hard numbers. His mind raced. What did it mean? Who was the nightingale and who was the shepherd they wanted to silence? A sudden sound, the distant ding of the main elevator, jerked him from his trance. Panic flared in his chest. He shouldn't be here. He pulled out his phone, his fingers fumbling with the screen. With a shaking hand, he aimed the camera through the gap and snapped a quick, clumsy photo. The flash was off, but the light from the monitors would be enough. He hoped. Just as he pocketed the phone, the monitors in the office flickered and went black. The room was plunged into darkness, save for the jeweled lights of the city outside. Someone had remotely killed the session. Leo's blood ran cold. He backed away from the door, his heart hammering against his ribs. He turned and fled, his silent sneakers now feeling thunderously loud in his own ears. He didn't stop until he was back on the main staircase, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He scrambled down the glass steps and collapsed back into his familiar spot by the pillar, his laptop's glow a small, comforting fire in the vast darkness. He sat there for what felt like an eternity, trying to regulate his breathing, his mind replaying the cryptic message over and over. This was not a spilled coffee situation. This was something dangerous. He had to tell someone. He looked around frantically. At the far end of the atrium near the main entrance, a security guard was doing his rounds. It was a large, heavy-set man named George, whose face was perpetually set in a bored, unimpressed scowl. Leo had seen him many times. George was the kind of man who moved slowly and thought even slower. But he was security. He was the right person to tell. Leo gathered his courage, stood up and walked towards him, his footsteps now echoing with nervous energy. "Excuse me, sir," Leo said, his voice sounding small in the enormous space. George turned, his expression shifting from boredom to annoyance. "What do you want, kid? You're not supposed to be wandering around. You know the rules. Stay with your mom." "I know, I'm sorry, but I saw something," Leo said, his words tumbling out. "In Mr. Thorne's office, on the 49th floor. His computer was on and there was a weird message. A threatening message." George's eyes glazed over. He sighed a long, suffering sound. A threatening message. What did it say? His coffee machine was broken. He chuckled at his own joke. No, it was serious. Leo insisted, frustration welling up inside him. It said something about a nightingale and silencing a shepherd. It looked like a code. And there was a weird program running, hiding a file transfer. The guard stared at him, his expression hardening into pure condescension. "Listen, kid. You've been watching too many spy movies. Mr. Thorne probably just left his machine on. Rich folks are careless. Now stop making up stories and go sit down before you get your mom in trouble. I don't want to have to write a report about the cleaning lady's kid running wild and bothering people. But I'm not making it up, I have a picture." Leo reached for his phone. "I don't want to see a picture of your video game," George snapped, turning his back on Leo and resuming his slow, deliberate patrol. "Go on now, scram." The dismissal was as solid and unyielding as the granite walls around them. Leo stood frozen, the guard's words ringing in his ears. Making up stories. Get your mom in trouble. He felt a hot flush of anger and helplessness. He was just a kid. the cleaner's son. His words meant nothing here. He was as invisible as the dust his mother wiped away each night. Defeated, he walked back to his pillar, the weight of the secret pressing down on him. He sank to the floor and pulled out his phone, his hands still trembling slightly. He opened the photo. It was blurry, shot through a narrow gap at a bad angle, but the words were there, glowing with an eerie digital light against the black background. The nightingale sings at dawn. Silence the shepherd. He stared at the image, the silence of the 47th floor no longer feeling like a sleeping giant's breath, but like the held breath of a predator before it strikes. He was alone with this. The guard didn't believe him. No one would believe him. But the glowing words on his screen were real, and they whispered a terrifying truth into the heart of the great sleeping building. Something was terribly wrong at Ethelred, and he was the only one who knew. Dawn broke over Lake Michigan, painting the sky in strokes of pale rose and liquid gold. From his penthouse on the 92nd floor of the Elysian Tower, Richard Torres watched the city awaken. He stood before a wall of seamless glass, a cup of black, unsweetened coffee in his hand. His reflection a sharp, spectral silhouette against the rising sun. The city below was his kingdom, a sprawling grid of concrete and ambition that he had in many ways helped to build. At 54, he was at the apex of his power, a titan of technology, whose company, Ethelred Corporation, was poised on the brink of changing the world. His routine was as precise and unvarying as the atomic clock on his wall. Up at 5, a 5-mile run on his private treadmill, 30 minutes of market analysis, and then this 10 minutes of stillness watching the world light up, the silence his only companion. His apartment was a testament to his personality, a vast minimalist space of white marble, black leather, and polished chrome. It was less a home than a statement, a declaration of control order and an impenetrable solitude. There were no family photos on the gleaming surfaces, no clutter, no warmth. The only personal item in the cavernous living space was a single framed photograph on a side table, which he pointedly ignored each morning. Project Nightingale was the source of the immense pressure that had become his constant companion. It was more than a product. It was his legacy. A revolutionary method of harnessing solar and kinetic energy. It promised clean, virtually limitless power. It would make fossil fuels obsolete, reshape global economies, and cement his name in the annals of history, alongside the likes of Edison and Tesla. The launch was in 3 days. After years of development and billions in investment, everything hinged on these next 72 hours. Failure was not a possibility he entertained. His phone buzzed on the granite countertop, the sound an unwelcome intrusion into his sanctuary. He glanced at the screen. It was a text from his son Alex. "Need tuition transfer, TX." That was it. Not "Hi, Dad." Not "How are you?" Just a sterile transactional demand. Richard's jaw tightened. He transferred the $20,000 with a few swift taps, his movements stiff with a familiar, bitter resentment. Alex was 19, a sophomore at a liberal arts college that Richard was convinced taught him little more than how to disdain the very system that paid for his education. Their last conversation a week ago had been a disaster. Alex had called him a machine, a hollow man in a bespoke suit who cared more for share prices than his own son. "You don't build things, Dad," Alex had sneered over the phone, his voice dripping with youthful certitude. "You build a cage. For yourself and everyone around you." The accusation stung because in the loneliest hours of the night, Richard feared it was true. He told himself he was doing this for Alex, building an empire for his son to inherit. But he knew deep down that the work was for himself. The relentless drive, the pursuit of perfection, the need to conquer it, was the only way he knew how to exist. It was the armor he wore against the messy, unpredictable chaos of human emotion. He placed his empty cup in the sink with a sharp click and turned away from the stunning, indifferent sunrise. It was time to go to work. The armor was required. When Richard Torres entered the Ethelred Tower, the atmosphere shifted. A silent electric current seemed to precede him. Lobby chatter ceased. Gazes dropped and a path cleared as if by an invisible force. He moved through the space with a predator's economy of motion, his eyes fixed straight ahead, acknowledging no one. He was not a cruel man, but he was a demanding one, and he believed that familiarity bred complacency. His employees were his assets. His soldiers and a general did not fraternize with his troops. He took his private elevator directly to the executive floor, the doors opening into a serene cloud-like expanse of white and gray. His executive assistant, a woman of terrifying efficiency named Evelyn, met him with a tablet. "Good morning, Mr. Torres," she said, her voice crisp. "Your 10 o'clock with the Nightingale engineering leads has been moved up to 9. They requested an urgent consultation." Richard's eyes narrowed. "Urgent on what grounds?" "They cited persistent system anomalies in the final diagnostic runs." A muscle twitched in his cheek. Anomalies. He repeated the word, tasting like an excuse. He strode into his office, a corner suite that offered a 180-degree view of his empire. "Get them in the boardroom in 5 minutes, Evelyn, and get me a full diagnostic report now." The boardroom was as cold and imposing as the man who commanded it. Richard sat at the head of a long obsidian table, the city's skyline a dramatic backdrop behind him. Opposite him sat his lead engineers, David Chen and Dr. Eris Thorne, Marcus Thorne's older, more brilliant and cautious brother. They were two of the finest minds in their field, but at that moment they looked like schoolboys summoned to the principal's office. "Explain." Richard commanded, his voice low and devoid of pleasantries. David Chen, the younger of the two, cleared his throat. "Mr. Torres, over the past 48 hours, we've been seeing intermittent but recurring data packet loss during the final stress tests. It's fractional, less than 0.01%, but it's inconsistent. We can't isolate the source. Furthermore," Eris added, his voice weighted with concern, "we've detected microfluctuations in the core regulator's timing protocols. They self-correct almost immediately, but they shouldn't be happening at all. It's like a ghost in the machine. A hiccup in the system's heartbeat." Richard listened, his face an unreadable mask of stone. He had read the report Evelyn provided. The data was there. The anomalies were real. But his mind, conditioned by years of pushing past obstacles and silencing dissent, interpreted their caution not as diligence but as fear. Fear of the finish line. Fear of failure. "And what is your proposed solution?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. "We need to postpone the launch," Eris said, meeting his gaze directly. "A week, maybe 2. We need to run a full system teardown line by line to find the source of these hiccups." Postpone. The word was anathema to him. Postponing would signal weakness to the markets. It would give his rivals an opening. It would be an admission of imperfection. "No," Richard said. The single word dropped into the room with the finality of a guillotine. Chen flinched. Eris held his ground, though a faint flush rose on his neck. "Mr. Torres, with all due respect," Eris pressed, "we are dealing with a technology that will interface with the national power grid. A fractional data loss, a microsecond timing error, if it occurs at the wrong moment during peak load, could have cascading consequences. It's a risk we shouldn't take." Richard leaned forward, the predator scenting blood. "Cascading consequences," he repeated, his voice laced with icy disdain. "For 2 years you have assured me that the system has triple redundancy, that it is the most stable platform ever designed. You have told me it is flawless. Now 3 days before launch, you come to me with ghosts and hiccups, and you want to delay. You want to stand in front of the world and announce that Ethelred's finest minds are afraid of a shadow." He stood up and walked to the window, his back to them. "This is not about a rounding error in the code, gentlemen. This is about nerve. We have run thousands of successful simulations. The system works. These are glitches, the kind that happen with any project of this magnitude. They are the machine settling. Your job is not to come to me with problems. It is to solve them. You have 72 hours. Fix it. No delays. No excuses." "Richard, please," Eris implored. "This is a mistake." Richard turned his eyes like chips of ice. "The only mistake, Dr. Thorne, would be showing the world that we lack the conviction to see our own vision through. You are the best in the world. Act like it." He looked from Oris's worried face to Chen's defeated one. "Is that understood?" There was a tense silence. Finally, Chen nodded. "Yes, Mr. Torres." Eris hesitated for a moment longer, a storm of protest in his eyes, but he eventually gave a stiff, reluctant nod. "Understood." "Good," Richard said, his tone dismissing them. "Get it done." They left the room, the scent of their frustration and anxiety lingering in the air. Richard remained standing by the window, his gaze sweeping over the city. He felt a surge of adrenaline, the familiar thrill of imposing his will and winning. He had faced down dissent and reinforced the mission. This was how empires were built, on unwavering resolve, on the refusal to bend. He thought of Alex's accusation again. A machine. Perhaps he was. But machines got things done. Machines did not get sidetracked by fear or doubt. Machines did not postpone. Alone in his sterile office high above the world, the Ice King of Ethelred stared at the model of the Nightingale power station that sat on a pedestal in the corner. It was a beautiful, elegant structure, a monument to his vision. He was so close. He would not allow the timidity of his own engineers to jeopardize it. He was certain he was right, certain that these anomalies were nothing more than the final groans of a new world being born. He was blind to the possibility that they were not birth pangs, but a warning. The faint, almost imperceptible tremor before the earthquake, a whisper from the ghost in the machine that he had willfully chosen to ignore. The security guard's dismissal was a physical blow, leaving Leo breathless and hollowed out in the silent atrium. For a moment, he was paralyzed by the sheer injustice of it. He had seen something real, something dangerous, and the person whose job it was to listen had treated him like a piece of trash to be swept away. The anger was a hot, useless ball in his stomach. But beneath the anger, something colder and more resilient took hold. Resolve. He would not be dismissed. He returned to his corner, the laptop's glow now feeling less like a comfort and more like a weapon. If the world of men in uniforms wouldn't listen to his words, he would have to make the world of data scream the truth for him. He plugged his phone into the laptop, the blurry image of Marcus Thorne's screen appearing in a pop-up window. It was his only proof, his Rosetta Stone for a conspiracy he didn't yet understand. His fingers flew across the keyboard, his movements a blur of practiced efficiency. First, he ran an image enhancement script, a custom tool he'd written himself. It sharpened the pixels, reduced the digital noise from the low-light shot, and made the cryptic text stand out in stark relief. The nightingale sings at dawn. Silence the shepherd. The words were no longer just a message. They were a problem to be solved, a lock to be picked. He began to work his mind, entering a state of hyper-focus that shut out the humming silence of the building and the gnawing fear in his gut. He broke the phrase down into keywords: Nightingale, Shepherd, Dawn. He started with the most obvious connection, Ethelred. He opened a dozen browser tabs, diving into the company's public-facing websites, news archives, and press releases. The word Nightingale hit almost immediately. Project Nightingale. Ethelred Corp. Unveils the future of green energy. It was everywhere. It was Torres's magnum opus, the revolutionary technology he had just discussed with his engineers. The launch, the article said, was scheduled for the end of the week. At dawn, symbolically. A chill traced its way down Leo's spine. The first piece had clicked into place with terrifying ease. The nightingale sings at dawn wasn't a metaphor for a bird. It was the code for the launch of the most important project in the company's history. The second line was harder. Silence the shepherd. Shepherd. It was a common word, leading him down a rabbit hole of irrelevant search results. He needed context. Who was the shepherd inside Ethelred? This wasn't something that would be in a press release. This was internal, a nickname, a piece of corporate culture. He thought about the people who truly knew the culture of a place, not the executives, but the people who moved through it unseen. People like his mother. He ran a new search, this time on less official channels. He scanned employee review sites, anonymous forums, and even old forgotten company blog posts from years ago. He found it on a page from a 2018 Meet the Team charity event. An employee had written a short jocular profile of Richard Torres. As our intrepid leader, the post read, Richard Torres guides his flock with a firm hand and an unwavering vision. We sometimes call him the shepherd, always leading us to greener pastures. The shepherd was Richard Torres. Leo's breath hitched. The message wasn't about sabotage. It was an assassination plot. Silence the shepherd. They were going to kill the CEO of Ethelred Corporation on the day of his greatest triumph. He felt dizzy, the scale of what he'd stumbled upon threatening to overwhelm him. This was no longer about a suspicious file transfer. This was about murder. He looked at the time on his laptop. 5:45 a.m. His mother would be finishing her shift soon. Richard Torres would be arriving for work in less than an hour. He had to warn him. There were no other options. The security guard had proven that the official channels were a dead end. He had to get to Torres himself. When Elena found him, he was packing his laptop away with frantic, jerky movements. She took one look at his pale, set face and the frantic energy radiating from him, and her maternal instincts went on high alert. "Leo, what is it? What's wrong?" He couldn't tell her everything. He couldn't tell her that he knew about a plan to murder the man who signed her paychecks. It would terrify her, and he needed her to be calm. "Mom, I found something. Something bad." He said, his voice low and urgent. "On one of the computers. I think the company is in some kind of danger. And Mr. Torres, too. I tried to tell the guard, but he didn't listen." Elena searched his eyes. She saw no childish fantasy there, only a deadly seriousness she had never seen in him before. She had always known her son was brilliant, that his mind worked on a different level. She trusted his intelligence implicitly. "What do you need to do?" she asked, her voice steady. "I have to talk to him, to Mr. Torres, when he gets here." She knew the risks. A cleaner's son confronting the CEO in the lobby could get them both fired. But the look in Leo's eyes told her this was more important than a job. "The executive garage," she said, her mind working quickly. "Level G4. He arrives between 6:30 and 6:45 every morning. His private elevator is in the northeast corner. If you want to catch him alone, that's the place." He nodded, grateful for her trust, for her immediate leap to partnership instead of panic. "Thank you, Mama." "Be careful, Leo," she whispered, her hand gripping his arm. "These are powerful people." "I will," he promised. The executive garage was a concrete cathedral dedicated to wealth. The air smelled of cold cement, expensive leather, and ozone from the charging stations. Rows of silent, gleaming luxury cars, Porsches, Bentleys, Teslas, sat in their designated spots like slumbering beasts. It was quiet, the only sounds the distant hum of the ventilation system and the frantic thumping of Leo's own heart. He found a spot behind a thick concrete pillar near the private elevator, a position that gave him a clear view of the entrance ramp without being immediately visible. He felt ridiculously small and out of place, a scruffy sparrow in a golden cage. He clutched the strap of his backpack, the laptop inside, feeling like both a shield and a burden. He ran the words over and over in his mind, trying to formulate a sentence that wouldn't make him sound like a lunatic. "Mr. Torres, your life is in danger. Project Nightingale is a trap. I saw a message." It all sounded insane, even to him. At 6:38 a.m., a car swept down the ramp. It was a black Maybach, its finish so deep it seemed to drink the light. It moved with a silent, imposing grace and parked in the spot marked CEO. Leo's heart leaped into his throat. This was it. The chauffeur got out and opened the rear door. But before Richard Torres could emerge, another figure stepped out of the shadows from a neighboring parking spot. It was Marcus Thorne. He was dressed in a razor-sharp gray suit, a smug, proprietary smile on his face. He was clearly waiting for the CEO, an obsequious lieutenant ready to greet his general. Leo knew he had lost his chance to speak to Torres alone. It was now or never. He took a deep breath, stepped out from behind the pillar, and started walking towards the Maybach. "Mr. Torres," he called out, his voice sounding thin and reedy. Thorne turned first, his smile vanishing as he saw Leo. His eyes, cold and reptilian, narrowed with instant recognition. He moved to intercept him before Leo could get within 10 feet of the CEO, who was now stepping out of the car. "Well, well," Thorne said, his voice a low, menacing purr. He physically blocked Leo's path, placing a firm hand on his chest. "Look what we have here. Are you lost, little boy? The service entrance is on the other side of the building. Or perhaps you're looking to steal some hubcaps to fund your little computer hobby." At that moment, Richard Torres looked up, his gaze sweeping over the scene. He saw his ambitious subordinate Marcus Thorne and a scruffy-looking teenager in a hoodie, a backpack slung over his shoulder, looking agitated and out of place. And in that instant, Richard didn't see a potential informant. He saw Alex. He saw the same defiant posture, the same accusatory stare, the same disregard for rules and authority that he faced at home. A wave of irritation, cold and immediate, washed over him. "What is this, Marcus?" Torres asked, his voice clipped. "Just a bit of refuse, Richard." Thorne said smoothly, his hand still pressing on Leo's chest. "The cleaner's kid. I caught him snooping around my office last night. Seems he has an overactive imagination. Now he's down here trying to accost you." "I wasn't snooping," Leo protested, trying to push past Thorne's restraining arm. He looked directly at Torres, his eyes pleading. "Mr. Torres, you have to listen to me. It's about Project Nightingale. It's a trap. I saw a message about silencing the shepherd." He thought using the code names would prove he knew something. He was wrong. To Richard Torres, a man whose mind was already hardened by his own domestic battles, the frantic, cryptic words only made the boy sound more unhinged. The shepherd Nightingale. It sounded like the nonsensical ramblings of a troubled teen, a cry for attention. Torres's face, already a mask of cold authority, became glacial. The brief flicker of curiosity was extinguished, replaced by pure, unadulterated annoyance. This was the last thing he needed this morning. A scene. A distraction. "I warned him, sir." Leo pressed, his voice cracking with desperation. "I tried to tell security. Nobody will listen." "And for good reason," Thorne interjected with a condescending laugh. "Because it's nonsense." Richard Torres took a step forward. He looked down at Leo, his gaze utterly devoid of warmth or empathy. It was the same look he gave a faulty piece of equipment or an underperforming stock. He saw a problem to be dealt with swiftly and efficiently. "I have a multi-billion-dollar company to run, young man." Torres said, his voice low and cutting. "I do not have time for childish fantasies." He turned his gaze from Leo to the security guard who had just come running, alerted by the commotion. "Handle this," the CEO commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Find his mother. Make it clear that my parking garage is not a playground. Get him out of my building." And with that, Richard Torres turned his back and strode towards his private elevator, Marcus Thorne falling into step beside him, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips. He didn't look back. To him, the incident was already over, a minor piece of static in a busy morning already forgotten. Leo stood frozen, the security guard's hand now clamped firmly on his shoulder. He watched the polished elevator doors slide shut, sealing the two men inside. He had failed. He had looked the shepherd in the eye and delivered a warning of his impending death, and the shepherd had looked back and seen nothing at all. He was invisible, a ghost, and the only other person in the world who knew the truth was the wolf, who was now standing right beside the shepherd. Elena was waiting in the gray utilitarian cavern of the employee locker room when the security guard brought Leo to her. The guard, a stern man she'd never seen before, held her son's arm in a grip that was meant to be firm, but was to a mother's eye bruisingly tight. Leo's face was pale, his eyes shimmering with a mixture of unshed tears and furious indignation. He wasn't looking at the guard or at her. He was staring at the scuffed linoleum floor, his jaw set in a line of profound defeat. "Mrs. Rodriguez," the guard said, his voice echoing with official disapproval. "I found your son trespassing in the executive garage, harassing Mr. Torres. This is your final warning. Any further incidents and your building access and your employment will be terminated. Do you understand?" Elena kept her face placid, her gaze downcast in a practiced mask of humility. It was a look she had perfected over 15 years of working in places like this. A look that made powerful men feel magnanimous and in control. "Yes, sir." She murmured, her voice soft and deferential. "I understand completely. It will not happen again. He is just a boy. I am very sorry for the trouble." The guard grunted, satisfied with her submissiveness. He released Leo's arm with a final proprietary shove and walked away, his heavy boots clopping with self-importance down the long corridor. The moment he was gone, Elena's demeanor transformed. The humility vanished, replaced by a fierce, focused concern. She knelt in front of Leo, taking his chin in her hand and tilting his face up to meet her eyes. "Leo," she said, her voice now steel, "tell me everything." And he did. The words poured out of him in a torrent of frustration and fear. He told her about the code, about Nightingale and the shepherd, about his certainty that it was an assassination plot. He recounted the confrontation in the garage, the dismissive cruelty of Marcus Thorne, and the final crushing indifference in Richard Torres's eyes. "He looked right through me." Mama, Leo finished, his voice breaking. "He didn't see a person. He just saw a problem. And Thorne, he knew. I could see it in his eyes. He was happy they weren't listening." Elena listened to it all without interruption, her expression growing more serious with every word. She pulled him into a hug, his wiry frame trembling against her. She held him for a long moment, letting her own quiet strength seep into him. When she pulled back, her eyes were clear and determined. She was not afraid. She was angry. For years she had accepted her role in this world. She was Elena the cleaner, a ghost who sanitized the lives of the important. She had taken pride in her work and her invisibility because it provided a life for her son. But they had not just dismissed her son. They had threatened him, made him feel worthless, and in doing so they had crossed a line. They had mistaken her quietness for weakness. It was a common mistake. "They don't see you, Leo," she said, her voice low and intense, echoing the thought he'd had earlier. "They look at you and they see a child. They look at me and they see a mop. They are blind. So we will have to find a way to make them see." Her shift was over, but her work was just beginning. She told Leo to wait for her in the locker room. Then she turned and walked towards the sub-level break room, the unofficial headquarters for the building's night shift crew. It was a cramped, windowless space that smelled of stale coffee and microwave lunches, but it was the true heart of the Ethelred Tower. Nothing happened in the 60 floors above that someone in this room didn't eventually hear about. The room was filled with the familiar faces of her cohort Maria, from the late-night catering service packing up her cart. Hector, the lead maintenance engineer for the graveyard shift, sipping a soda. And Carlos, the security guard who patrolled the upper floors, a kind older man who always saved the comics from the discarded newspapers for Leo. They were her work family, the community of the unseen. She approached them not with panic, but with purpose. She knew she couldn't lay out the whole story. It was too fantastic, too dangerous. She had to frame it in a way they would understand and accept. "I need your help," she said, her voice commanding their immediate attention. They had never heard Elena use that tone before. Leo saw something. On an executive's computer. "He thinks it's a serious threat against Mr. Torres. He tried to warn him, but they threw him out." Hector snorted. "Sounds about right. The gods up on the 60th floor don't like hearing bad news from us mortals down below." "This is different," Hector Elena insisted. "The boy is scared. And he is smart. I believe him. We need to get a message to Torres, but in a way he can't ignore. Not through security, not through his assistant. Directly. Something personal." A look of understanding passed between the members of the small group. They all knew the unwritten rules of this place. They knew that true knowledge didn't come from memos or meetings, but from observation. It came from emptying trash cans, fixing leaky pipes in private bathrooms, and restocking minibars at 3 in the morning. "He's been on edge all week," Carlos offered, rubbing his chin. "I see him on the monitors, pacing his office late at night, rubbing his temples. The Nightingale project has him wound tight." Maria, who often delivered late-night food trays to the executive floor, nodded in agreement. "Evelyn, his assistant, she says he's been getting stress migraines. She has a secret weapon for them." Elena leaned in, her senses sharp. "What weapon?" "A tea," Maria said, her eyes lighting up with the thrill of possessing a valuable secret. "It's a special blend. Chamomile lavender and something else. Valerian root, maybe. It's from a small shop in Old Town. Very expensive. She keeps a box of it locked in her desk drawer. She only makes it for him when he's at his breaking point, says it's the only thing that works." Elena felt a jolt of certainty. This was it. This was the key. A threat would be dismissed. An official report would be buried. But a small, intimate gesture of care, a secret known only to his most trusted assistant, that would be inexplicable. It would be a ghost in his own machine, a message from a world he didn't know existed. It would force him to stop and think. "Where does she hide the key to the drawer?" Elena asked. Maria smiled, taped under the keyboard tray. "Always." An hour later, Elena was riding the service elevator back up. The morning rush was in full swing, the building humming with a new kind of energy. But the service corridors were still quiet arteries hidden behind the gleaming facade. Elena moved through them with a quiet confidence, a master of her own hidden kingdom. She emerged on the executive floor. Her cleaning cart gave her the perfect cover. No one looked twice at a cleaner. She was just part of the scenery. She made her way to Evelyn's workstation, a neat, orderly desk just outside the imposing double doors of the CEO's office. The assistant had stepped away, likely to get her morning coffee. Elena's heart beat a steady, determined rhythm. She knelt, pretending to wipe down the desk's pedestal. Her hand slipped under the keyboard tray. Her fingers brushed against the cool metal of a small key held in place by a piece of tape. She slipped it into her palm. With swift, practiced movements, she unlocked the bottom desk drawer, her body shielding her actions from the hallway. Inside, just as Maria had described, was a small, elegant box of tea bags. She took one, relocked the drawer, and replaced the key. The entire operation took less than 20 seconds. Now for the final, most dangerous part. She pushed her cart to the doors of Richard Torres's office and used her master keycard to let herself in. The room was even more intimidating from the inside. It felt like standing at the peak of a mountain, the city spread out below like a map. The silence was absolute, the air charged with power. For a fleeting second, she felt a tremor of fear. She was a cleaner, a nobody. Who was she to challenge the king in his castle? Then she thought of Leo's face, of his humiliation and his courage. Her fear hardened into steel. She walked to the immense desk, a slab of polished obsidian that seemed as large as her entire kitchen. She took a small notepad and a pen from her pocket. Her handwriting was neat and clear. She thought carefully about the words, choosing them for maximum impact and minimum alarm. Mr. Torres, the shepherd is in the greatest danger when the nightingale sings. The message was not a fantasy. Please, for your own safety, listen to the boy. He sees the things that everyone else misses. She didn't sign it. The message wasn't from her. It was from the building itself. It was from the collective knowledge of the invisible. She folded the note once and placed it squarely in the center of his leather desk blotter. Beside it, she laid the single fragrant tea bag. The small, unassuming packet looked absurdly out of place in the landscape of immense power, a tiny, humble offering on the altar of a god. She took one last look around the silent, imposing room, then slipped back out, closing the door softly behind her. She returned to her cart and continued down the hall, her movements as calm and methodical as ever. No one had noticed a thing. Down in the locker room, she found Leo asleep, his head resting on his backpack, his face finally relaxed. She watched him for a moment, a fierce, protective love swelling in her chest. She had done what she could. She had taken the knowledge of the powerless and used it to plant a seed of doubt in the mind of the powerful. An unlikely alliance of the cleaner, the caterer, the engineer, and the guard had made its first move. They had left a quiet, undeniable challenge in the heart of the Ice King's fortress. Now all they could do was wait and see if the king was capable of seeing it. Richard Torres entered his office like a storm front moving in. The encounter in the garage had left a sour taste in his mouth, a residue of disorder that offended his obsession with control. It was the boy's eyes. He couldn't shake the desperate, almost feral intelligence in them. For a fleeting moment, they had reminded him of himself at that age, a powerless, furious boy convinced he was the only one in the world who could see the truth. He dismissed the thought as sentimental nonsense. He had a company to run. He tossed his briefcase onto a leather chair and strode toward his desk, his mind already calculating the day's agenda when he stopped dead. There, in the exact center of his pristine black leather blotter, was a folded piece of notepaper and a single pale green tea bag. His first reaction was a surge of cold fury, a security breach, in his office, his sanctum sanctorum. Someone had been in his private space, had touched his things. He buzzed for his assistant, his finger stabbing the button on his intercom. "Evelyn, get in here, now." She appeared in seconds, her face a mask of professional calm, but he could see the apprehension in her eyes. He pointed a rigid finger at the desk. "Explain that." Evelyn's gaze fell upon the note and the tea bag. Her composure fractured. A flicker of confusion, then genuine shock crossed her face. I have no idea, Mr. Torres. I just came in. No one has been in here but me to open the blinds." He picked up the tea bag, holding it between his thumb and forefinger as if it were a strange insect. The faint, familiar scent of chamomile and lavender wafted up to him. His anger faltered, replaced by a profound, unnerving chill that had nothing to do with the office's air conditioning. It was his tea. Not just any tea. It was the rare, expensive blend he drank only when the pressure became unbearable, when a stress migraine threatened to derail him. Evelyn was the only person on the planet who knew about it. He had never brought it to the office himself. She procured it for him, a silent, unspoken ritual between them. She was the gatekeeper to his one secret vulnerability. "Did you put this here, Evelyn?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "No, sir, I swear I didn't," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "The box is locked in my desk. I have the only key." He knew she was telling the truth. Evelyn was incapable of such a bizarre, unprofessional act, which meant someone else had been in his office. Someone who knew his habits. Someone who could bypass his world-class security without a trace and could also somehow access Evelyn's locked desk. It was impossible. Yet the proof was sitting on his desk. He dismissed her with a wave of his hand. Alone again, he unfolded the note. The handwriting was simple, neat. It was not the scrawl of a crank or a madman. It was calm, deliberate. Mr. Torres, the shepherd, is in the greatest danger when the nightingale sings. The message was not a fantasy. Please, for your own safety, listen to the boy. He sees the things that everyone else misses. The shepherd. The same insane word the boy had used. He sank into his high-backed leather chair, the note and the tea bag lying before him like objects in a surrealist painting. The fortress of his certainty, so solid and impenetrable just moments before, was showing its first hairline cracks. This was no longer a simple matter of a trespassing teenager. A prankster couldn't know about the tea. A corporate spy would have planted a bug, not a wellness remedy. This was something else entirely. It was a message delivered with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, designed to bypass his every defense and strike directly at his sense of order. He sees the things that everyone else misses. He thought of the boy's eyes again, the desperate intelligence, the frustration. He replayed the scene in the garage, but this time he saw it through a new lens. He saw the condescending smirk on Marcus Thorne's face. He heard the boy's frantic, specific words, nightingale, shepherd. They weren't random. They were connected. And this note, this impossible tea bag, was the corroborating evidence. His mind, cold and analytical, began to process the new data. An unknown party with intimate knowledge of his personal habits and access to his private office was attempting to deliver a warning through the son of a cleaning lady. It was the most absurd, inefficient, and theatrical method of communication he could possibly imagine. And yet, it was working. He was unnerved. He was listening. He made a decision, the kind that had built his empire. When faced with an anomaly, you don't ignore it. You dissect it. He buzzed the intercom again. Evelyn, I need you to find the cleaner from the night shift. Her name is Elena Rodriguez. Find her and her son and bring them to my office. Use the service elevator. I want this handled with absolute discretion. No one sees them come up here. Is that clear? Yes, Mr. Torres, she replied, the surprise evident even in her two-word answer. 20 minutes later, they were standing before him, the mother and the boy. They stood in the center of the vast Persian rug, looking small and fragile against the scale of the room and the panoramic view of the city behind them. Elena Rodriguez stood with a quiet, unshakable dignity, her hands clasped in front of her. She was not cowed. The boy Leo watched him with a wary, intelligent gaze. The frantic desperation was gone, replaced by a watchful stillness. Richard gestured to the note and the tea bag which still sat on his desk. One of you is going to tell me what this means. It was the boy who spoke. It means you're in danger. I will be the judge of that, Richard said coolly. You made some fantastic claims in the garage. You have my attention for exactly 5 minutes. Convince me. For the next 5 minutes, Leo talked. He didn't stammer or plead. He spoke with the cool, detached clarity of an analyst presenting a report. He started with the light under Marcus Thorne's door. He described the cloaked file transfer, the specific masking protocols he'd recognized. He pulled his laptop from his backpack, set it on the corner of the obsidian desk, and showed Richard the enhanced photograph of the screen. He then walked him through the logical steps he had taken to decode the message connecting Nightingale to the project and the shepherd to Richard's own nickname. Richard listened, his face impassive, but his mind was racing. The boy's technical vocabulary was precise. His logic was flawless. This was not the fantasy of a child. It was the rigorous analysis of a gifted mind. When Leo finished, Richard sat in silence for a long moment. You're accusing a senior executive of my company of conspiracy to commit murder based on a blurry photograph and a nickname you found on the internet. I'm not accusing him, Leo said, his voice steady. The data is. The audacity of the boy was staggering. Richard made another decision. It was time to put this theory to the test. He picked up his phone and dialed his head of cybersecurity. David, he said, addressing David Chen, I need you in my office. There's been a potential data breach I want you to investigate. When Chen arrived, he looked surprised to see the cleaner and her son standing before the CEO's desk. Richard ignored his questioning glance. Mr. Chen, Richard began, his tone clinical. I want you to run a full trace on all outbound data from Marcus Thorne's workstation for the last 24 hours. I want you to look specifically for fragmented packet transmissions funneled through encrypted VPNs. Check for any anomalies, no matter how small. Chen's eyebrows shot up at the specificity of the request, but he nodded. Right away, Mr. Torres. He set up a diagnostic tablet, his fingers flying across the virtual keyboard, as he remotely accessed Thorne's systems. The room was silent, the only sound the soft tapping of the screen. After a few minutes, Chen looked up, a hint of relief and vindication on his face. "Systems are clean, sir. Firewall is solid, no unauthorized outbound transfers. Thorne's machine is secure. Whatever you were worried about, it's a false alarm." Richard felt a flicker of disappointment. For a moment, he had allowed himself to be drawn into the boy's dramatic narrative. Perhaps the teabag was just an elaborate, meaningless prank after all. He was about to dismiss them all when Leo spoke, his voice quiet but clear. "You're looking in the wrong place." Chen turned, his expression a mixture of annoyance and disbelief. "Excuse me." Leo pointed to the screen. "You ran a standard trace. The script I saw running was designed to fool that. It breaks the data into thousands of tiny, harmless-looking packets like single words in a dictionary and sends them out through dozens of different ports over a period of hours. They're reassembled at the destination. Your scan is looking for a river, but you should be looking for raindrops." Chen stared at the boy, his mouth slightly agape. That's theoretical. The processing power required is immense." "It's not theoretical if you have a quantum server waiting on the other end," Leo countered. "Can you cross-reference the firewall logs? Don't look for a data transfer. Just look for any outbound pings. Even single-byte verification pings to servers based in Estonia or Latvia during that same time window. The script would need a handshake protocol." The arrogance was gone from Chen's face, replaced by a dawning sense of shock. He was being lectured on advanced cybersecurity by a 13-year-old in a hoodie. He looked at Richard, who gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. "Do it," Richard commanded. Chen's fingers tapped again, this time with a new urgency. He reconfigured the search parameters. The program ran. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a single line of text flashed red on the screen. Then another, and another. A complex web of connections began to appear, a constellation of tiny, almost invisible signals, all communicating with a single, heavily encrypted server address based in Tallinn, Estonia. The room was plunged into a dead, profound silence. David Chen stared at the screen as if it were a venomous snake. He was the head of a multi-million-dollar cybersecurity department, and a child had just shown him the gaping hole in his defenses. The fortress in Richard Torres's mind did not just crack, it crumbled into dust. He looked at the screen, then he looked at Leo. He was no longer seeing a reflection of his rebellious son. He was seeing a mind of singular, astonishing brilliance. He was seeing the ghost who had slipped into his fortress, the small, quiet voice that had told him the impossible truth. He stood up and walked over to David Chen. He placed a hand on his shoulder. "Leave us," he said, his voice a low, dangerous hum. A stunned and humbled Chen gathered his tablet and left the office, closing the door softly behind him. Richard Torres turned to face the mother and son. The ice in his demeanor had not melted, but it had been reforged into something else, the sharp, deadly focus of a general who has just been handed the enemy's battle plans. "You said you saw a threat," he said, his gaze fixed on Leo. "Show me everything." Richard Torres moved with the decisive speed of a man who had just seen the battlefield clearly for the first time. The moment of discovery was over. The time for war had begun. He led Leo and Elena not to the door, but to a discreet wood-paneled section of his office wall. He pressed his palm against it, and with a faint hiss of pneumatics, the panel slid aside to reveal a small, secure conference room. It was his private command center. One wall was a floor-to-ceiling smart screen currently displaying global market data. A sleek black table dominated the center, its surface embedded with holographic projectors and communication ports. This was the room where Richard Torres made the decisions that shaped the future of his company. Today, it would become the headquarters for the team that would save it. He summoned David Chen and Evelyn into the room. Chen entered with a look of profound humility, his earlier arrogance completely stripped away. Evelyn was her usual stoic self, but her eyes betrayed a deep curiosity as she looked at the cleaner and her son, who were now standing in the nerve center of Ethelred Corporation. "The four of us and Mrs. Rodriguez's son are the only people who will know this room is active." Torres announced, his voice leaving no room for questions. He looked at Chen. "David, your previous failure to detect this threat is forgiven on one condition. From this moment forward, you provide Mr. Leo Rodriguez with any and all technical resources he requires. You will be his hands inside the system. He is the lead on this investigation. Is that clear?" Chen looked at Leo, this 13-year-old boy who had effortlessly dismantled his department's defenses, and nodded without hesitation. "Crystal clear, Mr. Torres." Richard then turned to Evelyn. All my appointments are canceled. All my calls are to be held. The official story is that I am in a strategic off-site meeting preparing for the launch. You will be the gatekeeper. No one gets to me. No one. Understood, sir, she replied, her gaze unwavering. Finally, he looked at Leo and Elena. This room is now yours. Whatever you need, you will have. He turned to the main screen, and with a few gestures brought up a direct top-level schematic of the Ethelred network architecture. The company is at your disposal, Leo. Find the ghost. What followed was a marathon of intense caffeine-fueled work that blurred the line between day and night. The command center became a self-contained world, a bubble of quiet urgency suspended 60 floors above the city. Evelyn orchestrated a silent, constant supply of food, coffee, and water. Chen, humbled and refocused, became an extension of Leo's will, executing complex commands and pulling up data streams with a speed and precision Leo couldn't have managed alone. Torres paced the room like a caged panther, listening, questioning, and translating Leo's technical discoveries into their real-world strategic implications. And Elena, who at first felt utterly out of place in this high-tech world, quickly and quietly found her own crucial role. She became the keeper of the human element, the context that the data alone could not provide. The first breakthrough came when Leo identified the exact time of the initial breach when the malicious code was first planted. It was at 2:17 a.m. nearly 3 months prior. That's impossible, Chen said, shaking his head as he looked at the logs. The entire executive floor is on lockdown after midnight. The only people with that level of access are the senior partners and the systems administrators. They were all at home. Torres frowned, looking at the timestamp. There must be a mistake. But Elena, who had been quietly observing from a chair in the corner, spoke up. Her voice was soft, but it cut through the technical jargon. No, there's no mistake. That's the time for the quarterly deep clean and wax. The third Tuesday of the month. My crew is the only one on the floor at that time, along with the override security detail. Torres and Chen stared at her. But the system requires a 2-factor authentication from a registered workstation, Chen insisted. One of the workstations in the main boardroom is always left on for the cleaning crew, Elena explained patiently. For our time cards and work orders. And the guard who supervises the floor. His name is Franklin. His daughter has asthma. He spends half his shift in the hallway on his phone with his wife checking on her. He is a good man, but he is distracted. A stunned silence filled the room. In 2 sentences, Elena had provided the exact window of opportunity, the method and the security lapse that had allowed the breach. It wasn't a flaw in the firewall. It was a flaw in human nature. The ghost had walked in right behind the cleaning crew. Guided by this new insight, Leo changed his approach. He stopped looking for a single massive intrusion and started looking for 1,000 tiny insignificant ones. He explained his raindrops in a river theory to a fascinated Chen. For hours, he sifted through the endless ocean of data, his eyes scanning for patterns no algorithm was designed to detect. He found it in the source code of Nightingale itself. It was a single elegant subroutine of about 500 lines buried deep within the millions of lines of code that made up the project. It was disguised as a diagnostic tool for monitoring core temperature, a seemingly mundane and necessary function. This is it, Leo said, his voice hushed. He pointed to a section of the code on the main screen. This code is beautiful. It's too beautiful. What do you mean? Torres asked, moving to stand behind him. It's efficient. Over-engineered. Leo explained, his fingers flying across a keyboard, isolating the subroutine. The rest of the Nightingale code is brilliant, but it's the work of 100 different programmers over 5 years. It has different styles. Some parts are clunky, some are elegant. It's like a collage. But this piece is a masterpiece. It was written by one person, and they're a better coder than anyone on your team, Mr. Chen. No offense. Chen, staring at the screen, just shook his head in grudging admiration. None taken. He's right. That code is poetry. It's also a mask, Leo continued. He worked furiously, peeling back the layers of the subroutine, decompiling its encrypted commands. The room was silent, the only sound the frantic clicking of the keys. Torres, Elena, Chen, and Evelyn watched mesmerized as the boy worked. Then the true code unfurled itself across the giant screen. The elegant diagnostic tool dissolved, revealing the ugly predatory machine it concealed. Leo leaned back in his chair, his face pale. Oh no, he whispered. What is it? Torres demanded, his voice tight. It's not a virus, Leo said, his voice trembling with a mixture of horror and intellectual awe. It's not designed to destroy Nightingale. It's a siphon and a logic bomb. They don't want to kill your project, Mr. Torres. They want to steal it, and then they want to make it look like you're the one who failed. He stood up and walked Torres and the others through the diabolical code. He showed them the first part, the siphon. At the exact moment of the launch, when the system went live and connected to the global network, the backdoor would activate. It would create a compressed, encrypted copy of the entire Nightingale source code, its schematics, and all its proprietary research data. It would then transmit this data package through the same raindrop method he'd identified earlier to the server in Estonia. The theft would be instant, total, and virtually undetectable in the chaos of the launch. Then he showed them the second, more vicious part, the logic bomb. 5 minutes after the data was successfully transferred, a new command would be executed. It would introduce a tiny, almost imperceptible flaw into the core regulator protocols of Ethelred's version of the technology. The flaw would be dormant at first. Nightingale would appear to launch successfully. But as the system took on more and more of the power grid's load, the flaw would begin to cascade. It would cause minor fluctuations, then brownouts, and within 48 hours, a catastrophic system-wide failure. They're not just trying to set you back, Leo concluded, the full weight of the discovery settling on him. They're planning to ruin you. They'll let you take the fall for a massive public failure. The company's stock will collapse, and a few weeks later, they'll emerge with their own identical version of the technology, claiming they fixed the fatal flaw in your design. They won't just steal your life's work. They'll use it to erase your legacy and write their own. The room was as silent as a tomb. Richard Torres stared at the screen, at the elegant, malevolent lines of code that represented the complete and utter annihilation of everything he had ever built. This was not a simple act of corporate espionage. This was an execution. Finally, he spoke, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. Who? Leo was already working. The siphon code, for all its brilliance, had to have a signature, a telltale sign of its author. He cross-referenced the coding style, the specific encryption algorithms, the very grammar of the program against a database of known corporate and state-sponsored malware. He found a match. It was a near-perfect overlay with the signature style of a notorious piece of espionage software used 2 years prior to steal pharmaceutical patents. That attack had been unofficially but credibly linked to one man. Leo typed a name into the search bar and projected the result onto the main screen. It was a photograph of a man with silver hair, a predatory smile, and cold, dead eyes. Alistair Vance, the CEO of Omnigen, Ethelred's most ruthless and bitter rival. Richard Torres stared at the face of his enemy. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with brutal clarity. Vance's ambition was matched only by his lack of scruples. Marcus Thorne, his ambitious and amoral subordinate, was clearly the inside man, the traitor who had guided the ghost into the machine. The whisper Leo had heard in the glass tower was now a full-throated scream. The ghost in the machine finally had a face, and Richard Torres now knew he was not just in a fight for his company. He was in a fight for his very existence. The face of Alistair Vance stared out from the main screen in the command center, his smug, predatory smile a silent declaration of war. For Richard Torres, the confirmation of his rival's involvement was not a surprise, but a crystallization of years of bitter competition into a single tangible threat. Vance is the head of the snake. Richard said, his voice a low growl that seemed to vibrate with the hum of the servers. But Marcus Thorne is the fang embedded in my flesh. We can't just fire him. We can't let him know we're onto him. He'd alert Vance they'd scrub the servers and the ghost would disappear only to re-emerge later in a different form. We need to extract the fang cleanly and quietly, and we need the fang itself as proof. He turned his gaze from the screen to the people in the room. His eyes, once chips of ice, now burned with a cold fire. He was no longer just a CEO protecting his assets. He was a general planning a counterinsurgency. Leo Chen, I want you to build a digital cage for Thorne. Monitor every keystroke, every email, every file he accesses. But he can't know he's being watched. The slightest ripple in the network, and he'll bolt. He then looked at Elena. His expression softened the hard edges, giving way to a grudging, profound respect. Elena. He said, his use of her first name a quiet acknowledgement of their new reality. The digital world is only half the battle. Thorne is arrogant. He believes he's surrounded by fools and servants. He believes no one is watching. Your people, are they loyal? Can they be trusted? Elena met his gaze without flinching. They are not loyal to the company, Mr. Torres. They are loyal to each other. They trust me. They will help. The sub-level break room, once a place of respite, was transformed into a clandestine intelligence hub. Elena gathered her core team: Hector, the engineer, Maria from catering, and Carlos, the security guard. The air was thick with the smell of strong coffee and a nervous electric energy. She didn't tell them about the assassination plot or the multi-billion-dollar corporate espionage. She framed it in a language they understood: betrayal from within. Marcus Thorne is selling company secrets. She explained, her voice low and steady. He is putting all of our jobs at risk for his own greed. Management suspects, but they have no proof. They cannot see what we see. I need you to watch him. Listen. Report anything, no matter how small or insignificant it seems. We are the eyes and ears of this building. She gave them their assignments. Hector was to monitor the building's physical systems, elevator logs, keycard access to restricted areas, HVAC changes that might indicate an unusual meeting. Maria's route with the coffee and pastry cart took her past the executive offices a dozen times a day. She was to be their ears. Carlos from his security console was to be their all-seeing eye, logging every time Thorne deviated from his routine. They were an army of ghosts preparing to hunt a shadow. The first reports were trickles, small and seemingly disconnected. Carlos was the first to report, his voice a hushed whisper over the private communication channel Elena had set up. He's doing it again. Thorne, the camera in the west corridor near his office. It went offline for exactly 90 seconds at 10:17 p.m. Same as the last 2 nights. Then it comes right back on. In the command center, Leo mapped the data. It's a dead zone, he said, highlighting the corridor on a digital blueprint. He's using a localized jammer. It's a small window, but it's a clear pattern. He's doing something in that hallway he doesn't want recorded. The next report came from Maria. She was pushing her cart, offering lattes and croissants, her smile warm and vacant. As she passed Thorne's office, she saw him through the glass, standing by the window, his back to the door. He was on his phone, not his company iPhone, but a cheap disposable burner phone. She slowed, pretending to organize the sugar packets, her ears straining. The final transfer will be made after the nightingale sings. She heard Thorne say, his voice a tense, angry whisper. My end of the deal is done. Just make sure yours is ready. Maria didn't react. She finished her task and pushed her cart away, her heart hammering against her ribs. She relayed the message to Elena word for word. Then came Hector. He reported that Thorne had used his keycard to access the sub-level archives 3 times in the last week. The archives were a climate-controlled crypt of old paper documents, blueprints, and hard drives from before Ethelred had fully digitized. It was a place Thorne, as Chief of Strategic Development, had absolutely no reason to go. In the command center, the trickles were becoming a flood. Leo, Torres, and Chen worked like battlefield commanders, taking the fragments of human intelligence and weaving them into a coherent picture. The jammer creates a blind spot. Torres surmised, pacing in front of the main screen where Leo had overlaid all the data points. The burner phone is for communicating with Vance. The trips to the archives, what is he doing down there? A dead drop. Passing information. They were close, but it was all circumstantial. Thorne's lawyer would tear it apart in court. They had the shadow, but not the man. They needed something tangible, something physical. The breakthrough, when it came, was not from a camera or a microphone, but from 15 years of polishing floors. Elena was doing her nightly rounds on the executive floor. It was her domain, her kingdom of marble and glass. She knew its surfaces, its sounds, its very soul. As she guided her buffer over the plush, dark gray carpet in the corridor outside Thorne's office, she felt it a slight drag, a subtle snag in the machine's smooth glide. It was a tiny imperfection, the kind no one else would ever notice, but to her, it was as loud as a siren. She stopped the machine and knelt, her gloved fingers tracing the seam of the carpet. The blind spot. This was the exact spot where Carlos's camera went dead every night. She ran her hand over the area. Most of the carpet was firm glued to the concrete subfloor. But here, a single square of carpet about 2 feet by 2 feet felt different. It had a slight give to it. Her mind flashed back to an image from earlier that day. She had been in the hallway when Thorne had dropped his pen. She'd watched him bend to pick it up, and he had seemed strangely clumsy. his body positioned awkwardly over this very spot, as if to shield it from view. At the time, she had thought nothing of it. Now it was everything. Her heart pounded. She knew she was onto something. She looked around. The hallway was deserted. The only sound was the distant hum of the building. She pulled a small, flat-headed screwdriver from a pouch on her cart, a tool for prying open stubborn floor vents. With painstaking care, she inserted the tip into the carpet seam and gently pried. The carpet square lifted. Beneath it was not concrete, but a metal plate, the cover for a recessed floor junction box. It was the kind of box that housed electrical or data cables. Using the screwdriver, she lifted the heavy plate. And there it was. Nestled amongst the thick, insulated cables was a small, lead-lined pouch. It was heavy, designed to block electronic signals. Her hands trembling ever so slightly, Elena opened the flap. Inside, cushioned in a bed of soft foam, was a single custom-made USB key. It was made of brushed black metal with no logo or identifying marks. It was sleek, anonymous, and radiated a cold, dangerous energy. The smoking gun, the Fang. She placed everything back exactly as she had found it, her movements precise and automatic. She finished her work on the floor, her mind a whirlwind. She had to get the key to Leo. She took the device not to the command center, but to the sub-level break room where she knew she wouldn't be seen. She wrapped it in a cleaning cloth and gave it to Hector, who then took it on his maintenance rounds, finally passing it to Carlos, who delivered it to Evelyn as part of an inter-office mail delivery. The transfer was a ghost, moving through the building's veins, utterly invisible to the official security systems. When Evelyn placed the cloth-wrapped object on the table in the command center, the mood became electric. Richard Torres watched as Leo, his face grim with concentration, took the USB key. He didn't plug it into their network. Instead, he connected it to a sandboxed, standalone analysis machine, a computer completely isolated from the outside world. He ran the program. The drive's contents appeared on the screen. It held only 2 files. The first was a heavily encrypted data packet. The second was a sophisticated communication program. When Leo launched it in the isolated environment, it immediately began sending out a signal, a digital handshake, searching for a single specific recipient, the server in Estonia. It was a digital key designed to fit a single lock. "This is it," Leo whispered, his voice full of awe. "This is the device he used to plant the back door. All the core malware is in this encrypted file." Elena stood beside him, watching the screen, her son's quiet whisper confirming the significance of what her instincts had found in the dark. She had followed the faintest of trails, a whisper of displaced carpet fiber, and it had led them to the very heart of the conspiracy. The shadow of the traitor had finally yielded to the quiet, undeniable evidence of the object he had tried so desperately to hide. They had him. The black USB key lay on the obsidian table in the command center, a tiny object radiating a universe of malice. It was the physical manifestation of their enemy, the tangible proof of a plot designed to annihilate them. For Richard Torres, a man accustomed to crushing his opposition through market forces and legal leverage, the path forward seemed clear. He was on the phone with his chief legal counsel, his voice a blade of surgical steel. "I want his assets frozen by noon. Every stock option, every bonus, every offshore account we can find. I want him legally and financially erased before he even knows what's happened. File a preliminary injunction based on corporate espionage. We'll use the USB drive as evidence in a sealed hearing." He was a shark, sensing blood moving in for a swift, brutal kill. But as he ended the call, a quiet voice cut through his predatory focus. "That's not enough!" It was Leo. He stood before the main screen, his expression serious beyond his years. "You'll destroy Mr. Thorne." The boy said, his voice steady. "But Alistair Vance will walk away. He'll claim Thorne was a rogue employee, that he knew nothing about it. He'll issue a public apology, fire a few scapegoats, and in 6 months he'll try again. You'll have won the battle, but you'll have left your real enemy on the field." Richard stared at the boy. The raw, inescapable logic of his words extinguished his fiery anger, replacing it with a cold, calculating focus. Leo was right. A victory against Thorne was a hollow one. The real prize was Vance. But proving the link connecting the Fang back to the snake seemed impossible. Vance was too careful, too insulated. "Then what do you propose?" Richard asked the question, a genuine request for counsel. The shift in their dynamic was now complete. They were no longer CEO and cleaner's son. They were commander and chief strategist. Leo turned to the holographic projector in the center of the table. "We don't stop the attack." He said, his words hanging in the air with audacious weight. "We don't expose Thorn. Not yet. We let them think they're winning. We let the nightingale sing. But we change the song." His fingers danced across a control panel, and a three-dimensional schematic of the Ethelred network sprang to life in the air above the table. Luminous blue lines represented their data. A pulsing red line represented the enemy's siphon. "This is what they want," Leo said, pointing to the core dataset of Project Nightingale, a glowing sphere of information at the heart of the network. "They plan to pull this data at the moment of launch, so we let them." David Chen, who had been listening in stunned silence, finally spoke. "Leo, that's insane. We can't just hand them the most valuable proprietary data on the planet." "We won't," Leo replied, a confident gleam in his eye. "We'll give them a gift. A Trojan horse. We'll build a honeypot." He manipulated the hologram. A second identical sphere of data appeared beside the original. "You and your team, Mr. Chen, will help me create a perfect decoy of the Nightingale dataset. It will have the same file structures, the same size, the same everything. It will pass any initial scan. We will feed this to the siphon while insulating the real data behind a new series of firewalls. They'll think they're stealing the crown jewels, but they'll be taking a box of fakes. And the logic bomb." Richard asked, his mind already grasping the brilliant deception. "How do we stop them from destroying our system?" "We don't remove the bomb," Leo said. "Thorn's software will be expecting to see it. If it's gone, it might trigger a warning on his end. So we defuse it silently. I'll write a counterpatch, a piece of code that will wrap itself around the logic bomb. At the exact nanosecond, the bomb is supposed to detonate and corrupt the system my patch will activate instead. It will encapsulate the malicious code, rendering it inert, while simultaneously sending a success signal back to the malware. They will think they've blown up the building, but all they will have done is set off a party popper in a soundproof room." The audacity of the plan was breathtaking. It was a high-wire act of digital warfare, a multi-layered deception that required perfect execution. It was dangerous, risky, and utterly brilliant. But the proof, Richard pressed, playing devil's advocate. "How does this prove Vance's involvement?" Leo smiled for the first time, a flash of youthful excitement in his otherwise grim focus. "That's the best part. The decoy data won't just be a fake. It will be a trap. We'll embed a digital beacon into the very heart of the code. It will be dormant, undetectable. But the moment anyone tries to compile the code on a new system, the moment Vance's engineers try to open their stolen prize, the beacon will activate. It will broadcast a signal containing its new IP address, its geographic location, and a complete record of the user who accessed it. And we will make sure that signal is broadcast not just to us, but to every major news outlet and financial institution in the world, live during your launch presentation." The room was silent. Elena stared at her son, her heart swelling with a fierce, terrified pride. Chen looked as though he had just been shown the secrets of the universe. Richard Torres felt a slow smile spread across his face. It was not a smile of warmth, but of pure predatory delight. The boy had not just offered him a shield, he had handed him a sword, a way to not only survive but to turn his enemy's greatest weapon against him, and achieve a victory so total, so public that Alistair Vance would never recover. "Do it," Richard commanded, his voice ringing with renewed authority. "Give this team whatever they need. Build your trap, Leo." The command center became a whirlwind of controlled chaos. The next 36 hours were a desperate, sleepless race against the clock. Whiteboards were filled with complex algorithms, and then erased only to be filled again. The floor became littered with empty coffee cups and discarded food containers. Leo and a revitalized David Chen led a small hand-picked team of Ethelred's most trusted coders, working in a secure offline server room to construct the honeypot. It was a painstaking process, reverse engineering years of work to create a flawless, weaponized duplicate. Chen, his professional pride now channeled into a powerful new purpose, worked in perfect sync with Leo, his years of experience, providing the structure for Leo's intuitive genius. While the digital trap was being built, Elena's army of ghosts kept the traitor under constant silent surveillance. The mission was no longer to find proof, but to ensure normalcy. They were the guardians of the illusion, making sure Thorn felt safe, secure, and completely unwatched. Maria continued her coffee runs, reporting on his mood. "He seems confident, almost giddy," she texted Elena. Hector monitored his movements, ensuring he made no more trips to the archives, no deviations from his routine. Thorn was a fly happily crawling towards the spider's web, completely oblivious to its existence. Richard, meanwhile, prepared for the performance of his life. He had to stand on a global stage and present Project Nightingale with passion and confidence, knowing that the entire presentation was a lie, a piece of theater designed to lure his enemy into the light. He rehearsed his speech, every word a carefully chosen piece of bait. He coordinated with a trusted outside cybersecurity firm, setting up the infrastructure to receive and broadcast the beacon's signal when and if it activated. The pressure was immense. A single mistake, a line of bad code in the counterpatch, a suspicious glance from a security guard that spooked Thorn, and the entire operation would collapse, and with it, Ethelred itself. Finally, after 35 hours of non-stop work, it was done. The honeypot was created and seamlessly integrated into the network, a beautiful, deadly mirage. The counterpatch was uploaded, a silent, microscopic shepherd, ready to protect the flock. It was just before dawn on the day of the launch. Leo and Richard stood together in the command center, the vast room now quiet, the work complete. They stood before the windows, watching the first pale fingers of light stretch across the horizon, the same view Richard had looked upon just 2 days earlier, a lifetime ago. He was a different man now. The ice around his heart had not melted, but it had been given purpose. He looked at the exhausted but electrified boy beside him. In Leo, he saw not a reflection of his own estranged son, but a reflection of the best parts of himself, the relentless drive, the vision, the refusal to accept defeat. He placed a heavy hand on Leo's shoulder. "The trap is set," Richard said, his voice a low rumble. "Are you ready to show Alistair Vance what a ghost and a shepherd can do together?" Leo looked up at the titan of industry, no longer with fear or awe, but with the quiet confidence of a true partner. He nodded. "He'll never see us coming." The Ethelred Tower Auditorium was a theater of power. Polished chrome and soft gray acoustics swallowed sound, creating a reverent hush that was broken only by the low murmur of anticipation from the assembled crowd. Every seat was filled. In the front rows sat the titans of finance, stern-faced investors who controlled the flow of global capital. Behind them were the politicians and regulators, the arbiters of policy and law. Fanned out in the back were the journalists and media personalities, the modern scribes of history. Their cameras poised like vultures, ready to document a triumph or a feast on a failure. In the very center of the front row, a guest of honor sat Alistair Vance. He was the picture of corporate grace, dressed in a tailored Italian suit, his silver hair gleaming under the stage lights. He projected an air of relaxed confidence, a magnanimous rival attending the coronation of a peer. But to those who knew him, there was a predatory stillness in his eyes, the look of a shark waiting for blood in the water. Near the side of the stage, in a reserved section for senior Ethelred executives, stood Marcus Thorn. He was a bundle of nervous energy, constantly adjusting his tie, checking his diamond cufflinks. He looked like a proud lieutenant on the verge of a great victory, but a fine sheen of sweat on his brow betrayed the immense tension coiled within him. He kept glancing at his watch, not out of boredom, but like a man counting down the seconds to a detonation. The lights dimmed. A single powerful spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the center of the stage. Into this circle of light walked Richard Torres. He wore a simple dark suit, no notes in his hand, his presence alone commanding the cavernous room. He looked out at the sea of faces, his gaze sweeping past investors and journalists, until it rested for a fraction of a second on Alistair Vance. Their eyes met. Vance gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of patronizing encouragement. Richard's face remained a mask of calm, controlled power. "We were told it was impossible." Richard began, his voice resonating through the auditorium, a deep, confident baritone. "We were told that the dream of truly clean, limitless energy was a fantasy for the next generation. We were told that the obstacles were too great, the established powers too entrenched, the technology too far out of reach. They were wrong." High above, in the silent, darkened command center, the speech was just background noise. The real drama was unfolding on a constellation of screens, watched by a small, sleepless team. Leo sat at the central console, his posture a study in focused intensity. His face, illuminated by the glow of the monitors, was calm, but his fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to move in a blur. Beside him, David Chen monitored the integrity of the real Nightingale network, his expression a mixture of terror and awe. Across the table, Elena watched a bank of security monitors, her eyes flitting between feeds from the auditorium, the hallways, and the executive floor. Her gaze was fixed on two men, the smug viper in the front row and the sweating traitor by the stage. "He's checking his watch again," she murmured, her voice the only sound in the room. "Every 30 seconds. "He's waiting for the signal," Leo said without looking up from his screen. "He's anxious to get paid." On stage, Richard was mesmerizing. He spoke of the future of a world powered by ingenuity and not by plunder. He spoke of Ethelred's commitment to security, to protecting their vision from hostile forces in a competitive world. The words were for the audience, but the meaning was a private coded message to his team 60 floors above. He was a master performer weaving a narrative of hope and triumph, all while knowing that the foundation of his stage was a trapdoor waiting to be sprung. He walked the audience through the science, the engineering, the sheer scale of Project Nightingale. Finally, he arrived at the presentation's crescendo. A dramatic three-dimensional animation of the technology in action began to play on the massive screen behind him. "The time for dreaming is over," Richard declared, his voice rising with theatrical power. "The time for a new dawn is here. And now I am proud to declare that Project Nightingale is live." He reached out and pressed a large illuminated green button on the podium. A wave of thunderous applause erupted from the audience. In the command center, no one clapped. Instead, a series of silent crimson alarms flashed across Leo's monitor. "It started," Leo said, his voice flat and steady, cutting through the muffled sound of the applause from a nearby speaker. "The siphon is active. They're in." On the holographic map, a pulsing red line snaked out from the heart of their network, connecting to the server in Estonia. But it wasn't drawing from the real data. It was connected to the honeypot. "They're taking the bait," Chen breathed, his eyes wide. "The decoy data is flowing. It's working." Elena's gaze was fixed on her monitor. Thorn just checked his smartwatch. He's smiling. He thinks he's done it. In the front row, Alistair Vance allowed himself the smallest, most self-satisfied of smiles. He had won. Torres was a fool, a pompous showman celebrating his own demise. The next 90 seconds were the longest in Richard Torres's life. He stood on stage smiling and accepting the applause, the consummate showman. But his mind was in the room above with the boy and his team waiting for the trap to spring. In the command center, they watched the data transfer progress bar fill. It reached 100%. The red line on the map vanished. "Transfer complete," Leo announced. "The siphon is dormant." A tense silence fell. They had stolen the fake data. Now came the crucial part. Would Vance's legendary arrogance outweigh his caution? Would his desire to see his prize be too great to resist? On Elena's monitor, Thorn was typing something into his burner phone, his hands hidden by the podium. "He's sending the confirmation message," Elena said. Miles away in a secure, sterile command center of his own, Alistair Vance received the message. His victory was total. He turned to his own lead engineer. "I want to see it," he commanded, his voice thick with triumph. "Decrypt the package and begin compilation. I want to see the code of the king I just dethroned." Back in the Ethelred command center, a new alert flashed on Leo's screen. It was a brilliant flashing gold. He didn't shout. He didn't even raise his voice. He simply stated the fact that would change everything. "Beacon is active." He spun in his chair and looked at Evelyn. "Give Mr. Torres the signal. Now." On the stage, a small discreet light on the podium next to Richard's hand switched from green to blue. He saw it. He held up a hand, and the applause, which had just begun to die down, fell away into an expectant silence. "Thank you," Richard said, his voice now holding a new, sharper edge. "Thank you. Before we proceed to the question and answer session, I'd like to give you all a live demonstration of Project Nightingale's integrated cybersecurity protocols. It's a new security feature we're calling the Shepherd Protocol. It's designed to actively hunt and expose any threat to our network in real time." A confused murmur rippled through the audience. In the front row, a flicker of unease crossed Alistair Vance's face. What was this? This wasn't part of the program. Richard gestured to the massive screen behind him. "Show them," he commanded. The beautiful animation of Nightingale vanished. It was replaced by a map of the world. A single pulsing red beacon flared to life over northern Europe. Lines of data began to stream across the screen, showing a live trace of the beacon's signal. The signal was originating from a server farm in Tallinn, Estonia. The screen zoomed in, resolving the location not just to a city, but to a specific building. A building owned and operated by a shell corporation known to be a subsidiary of OmniGen. The crowd gasped. But it didn't stop there. More data flooded the screen. The IP address of the machine that had accessed the file. The admin-level user credentials. The exact time of access. And at the bottom of the screen in large block letters, the name of the file they were attempting to compile. Nightingale, master source, code, decoy, V1. The word decoy hung in the air like a death sentence. The auditorium erupted into chaos. Journalists were shouting, their cameras flashing. Investors were on their feet pointing at the screen, their faces a mixture of shock and fury. Alistair Vance had gone completely white. The mask of civility was gone, replaced by a rictus of pure, unrestrained horror. He looked from the screen to Richard Torres, his eyes screaming a silent, impotent rage. He had not just been beaten, he had been publicly executed, and he had been forced to load the gun and pull the trigger himself. Marcus Thorne was paralyzed. He stood by the stage, his face a grotesque mask of disbelief, his mind unable to process the sheer totality of his failure. The trap had not been for Torres, it had been for him. Richard Torres stood calmly at the podium, a commander surveying a victorious battlefield. As prearranged federal agents began to move discreetly through the panicked crowd, making their way towards a frozen Marcus Thorne and a sputtering Alistair Vance. Richard leaned into the microphone. As you can see, he said, his voice cutting through the pandemonium with icy calm. Project Nightingale is more than secure. Any attempt to steal our future will only result in the forfeiture of your own. The Nightingale had sung, but it was a song of justice, a triumphant, piercing note that had just shattered an empire of greed and deceit for the entire world to hear. The chaos that erupted in the Ethelred auditorium was the sound of an empire collapsing. The live broadcast of OmniGen's corporate espionage sent shockwaves through the financial world before Richard Torres had even finished his sentence. In the front row, Alistair Vance, sputtering with rage and disbelief, was quickly surrounded by a calm but unyielding team of federal agents. His blustering threats and claims of a setup dissolved into pathetic whimpers as a warrant was produced, authorized based on the irrefutable real-time evidence being broadcast to the entire world. Marcus Thorne, however, did not have the luxury of a slow, dignified collapse. As the agents approached him, his paralysis broke. He made a desperate, animalistic attempt to flee, scrambling over chairs and pushing through the panicked crowd. But his escape was cut short by a large, immovable object in a maintenance uniform. Hector, who had been positioned near the exit, simply stuck out a leg. Thorne went down in a heap of expensive tailoring and shattered pride, and was promptly handcuffed. His face pressed into the plush carpet he had once walked upon like a king. High above the pandemonium, in the quiet, sterile bubble of the command center, the tension finally broke. David Chen let out a long, shuddering breath and sank into a chair, looking at Leo with an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. Evelyn, for the first time since anyone could remember, was smiling a genuine, unguarded expression of relief. Elena walked over to her son, who was still sitting at the console, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. She wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his hair. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. In the silent, fierce embrace, she poured all of her pride, her love, and her relief into him. The door to the command center slid open, and Richard Torres stepped inside. The triumphant mask he had worn on stage was gone. His face was etched with the fatigue of a brutal, protracted war, but his eyes were clear. He looked at the small group of people who had saved him, his gaze lingering on Leo and Elena. He didn't offer a bonus or a handshake. He offered something far more valuable. "You did it," he said, his voice quiet and heavy, with a gratitude that went beyond words. "All of you. You saved this company. You saved me." In that moment, the 60 floors that separated the CEO from the cleaner ceased to exist. They were simply a team united by a victory that belonged to them all. In the weeks that followed, the fallout for Alistair Vance and OmniGen was catastrophic. Faced with undeniable evidence, Vance's empire crumbled. Stock prices plummeted into oblivion. Investors fled and federal indictments rained down. The story of Ethelred's Shepherd Protocol became a corporate legend, a case study in digital warfare taught at business schools around the world. Project Nightingale, free from the shadow of sabotage, launched flawlessly. Its success was even greater than predicted, and Ethelred's stock soared to unprecedented heights. But Richard Torres knew that the technology was only half the story. The true victory, the one that mattered, was the one that had happened in the shadows of his own building. He called for another press conference. The auditorium, once the scene of a dramatic corporate takedown, was now filled with an eager, adoring press corps. They expected to hear about profit margins and market expansion. Richard gave them something else entirely. He stood at the podium, but this time he was not alone. He had asked Elena and Leo to join him on stage. Elena, who had politely refused the offer of an expensive designer wardrobe, stood beside him in a simple but elegant navy blue dress, her quiet dignity a powerful counterpoint to the room's opulence. Leo, looking endearingly awkward in a new suit, stood on his other side, his hands clasped behind his back. "Today, I am not here to talk about our success." Richard began, his voice resonating with a newfound warmth. "I am here to talk about its source. We have been lauded for our technology, for our security, for our strategy. But all of those things are just tools. The true strength of this company, the source of its salvation, was not found in a server room or a boardroom. It was found in the people we failed to see." He told a carefully redacted version of the story. He spoke of a brilliant, observant boy and his wise, courageous mother. He didn't use their names, at first referring to them as the eyes that see what we miss and the heart that dares to speak truth to power. For years, Richard confessed, his gaze sweeping across the stunned faces of the journalists. "I believed that vision only flowed from the top down. I was wrong. The most important data, the most critical intelligence came from the people who walk our halls every night, ensuring this company is ready for us each morning. We have the finest security systems money can buy, but our greatest asset was the integrity of a mother who trusted her son." He then turned and formally introduced them. "I would like you all to meet Leo Rodriguez and his mother, Elena Rodriguez. They are the true heroes of this story." A wave of applause, genuine and heartfelt, filled the room as 1,000 cameras flashed, capturing the image of the billionaire CEO and the cleaner's family standing together as equals. But Richard was not finished. "This cannot be a one-time event," he announced. "It must be a new beginning. That is why, effective today, Ethelred Corporation is launching the Elena Rodriguez Initiative. It is a multi-million-dollar program dedicated to identifying, training, and promoting talent from within every level of our company. We will fund education, provide mentorship, and create new pathways to leadership for the often overlooked members of our staff, our service workers, our maintenance crews, our administrative staff. Because we now know that our next great idea might come from the person who cleans our office, not the person who sits in it." He then announced that Elena Rodriguez, with her unparalleled understanding of the building's human systems, had accepted the position of executive director of the new initiative. Finally, he turned to Leo. "And for the young man who showed us all what true genius looks like," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "Ethelred is creating a new unconditional scholarship. The Leo Rodriguez Grant for Innovation will be awarded to Leo, funding his entire university education at any institution he chooses in the fields of cybersecurity and ethical artificial intelligence, so that he may continue to build a safer and better future for us all." Later that week, Richard sat on a park bench, a place he hadn't been in years. Across from him, looking wary and suspicious, was his son Alex. There were no assistants, no bodyguards. It was just the two of them. "I saw the press conference," Alex said, his tone less hostile than usual. "It was impressive. I'm trying to learn how to listen." "Alex," Richard said, his voice stripped of its usual corporate authority. It was just the voice of a father. "For a long time, I thought building things was the most important thing a man could do. But I was wrong. Seeing things, seeing people, that's what matters. I'd like to see you if you'll let me. I'd like you to come and see what we're really building now. Not just with steel and glass, but with people." Alex was silent for a long time. Then, for the first time in years, he looked at his father and gave a small, hesitant nod. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a solution, but it was a start. It was a crack in the ice. 6 months later, the Elena Rodriguez Initiative was in full swing. In a bright, airy classroom on the 30th floor, Elena stood before a group of 20 employees, cleaners, security guards, cafeteria workers, leading a seminar on systemic observation and communication. She was a natural, her quiet authority and genuine empathy commanding the room. On a large screen behind her, Leo, calling in from a prestigious university prep program, was guest lecturing on basic network security, explaining complex ideas in simple, accessible terms. Watching from the back of the room, unseen by the class, was Richard Torres. He wasn't there as a CEO inspecting a program. He was there as a proud partner. He saw the future of his company in that room, a future that was brighter, stronger, and more resilient than anything he had ever imagined. After the class, the three of them stood together in his office looking down at the city. On the great obsidian desk, there was a new architectural model. It was not a power station or a corporate tower. It was a community technology center, the first major project of the initiative to be built in Leo and Elena's neighborhood. "It's a good design," Elena said, tracing the lines of the roof with her finger. "It needs a better firewall," Leo countered with a grin. Richard smiled, a genuine, warm expression that reached his eyes. "Then it's a good thing I have the best consultants in the world." They stood in comfortable silence, the king the cleaner, and the boy prodigy, no longer defined by their titles, but by the extraordinary journey they had shared. They were an unlikely alliance, a testament to the fact that true power is not the ability to command, but the wisdom to listen. That the brightest light can come from the dimmest corridors. And that true vision is not about looking out at a kingdom from a high tower, but about seeing the infinite value in the person standing next to you. The nightingale's song was no longer an echo of a threat, but the beautiful, resonant melody of a new and better day. In the end, the story of Ethelred was not about a company that was saved, but about a company that was reborn. It learned that its foundations were not made of concrete and steel, but of the human beings who gave the structure its soul. It discovered that the most sophisticated security system is a culture of mutual respect, and the most valuable asset is the untapped potential of every single employee. Marcus Thorne and Alistair Vance sought to build their empires on the ruins of others, and in the end, they were buried under the weight of their own greed. Richard, Elena, and Leo built something far more enduring, a legacy of opportunity, a testament to the simple, powerful idea that a person's worth is not determined by their station, but by their character, their courage, and their willingness to see. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Stories like these remind us that in a world that often rushes past, taking the time to truly see and listen to those around us can make all the difference. We hope this story has touched your heart and inspired you. If you enjoyed it, please consider supporting our channel by liking this video and subscribing for more stories that celebrate the quiet heroes and the extraordinary power of the human spirit.